Well, more than 100 youth activists and government officials from dozens of countries are in New York this week participating in the Global Youth Summit against violent extremism. The event is co-hosted by the U.S. State Department Counter-Extremism Project and Search for Common Ground, and the Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, Richard Stengel, is among the senior U.S. officials speaking at the event. The U.S. State Department correspondent Pam Dockins sat down with him and asked him about the State Department's work to counter violent extremism.
The idea is that the president wants to convene world leaders to really focus on this at UNGA. And so there's a kind of more kinetic aspect to it, which is focusing on anti-ISIL. And then there's a larger, broader effort, which we call CVE, Countering Violent Extremism, which has all kinds of manifestations: education, civil society, media. So that it will be a very broad focus.
Specifically, what are some of the aspects that you hope to discuss with countering violent extremism in meetings with heads of states from other countries, and how do you hope to use this as a follow-up?
Well, again, one of the sets of things that we're focused on is the globalization of ISIL, or Daesh as we call it, which is the Arabic name. So there will be conversations with world leaders in those countries where ISIL is actually growing and are creating their own kind of markets there. So that's one thing. Then there's the kind of, again, not softer so much, but the kind of countering violent extremism that has to do with educational exchanges, with programs where we deal with people who are returning back to their community, former fighters, the rehabilitation of young men and women who may have actually gone and fought for an extremist group. So it runs that whole gamut of hard to soft.
Specifically, what are some of the aspects that you hope to discuss with countering violent extremism in meetings with heads of states from other countries, and how do you hope to use this as a follow-up to the president's earlier initiative?
Well, one of the things that's under me as Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy is the Center for Strategic Counterterrorism Communications, which was set up under Secretary Clinton to counter al-Qaeda messaging, and then it morphed into a full-time counter-ISIL messaging machine. And as you mentioned, ISIL is very sophisticated in social media, but actually I think the scales are shifting. I mean, if you look at what the volume of messaging that they are doing, and not just US messaging to counter it, but messaging by Muslims around the world, that share is actually growing. So I actually always say that we're not the best messenger for our message. Obviously, a lot of people who are attracted to ISIL are anti-US. So part of what we do at CSCC is to enlist third-party groups, non-governmental organizations, other media businesses to...
One of the things that you were involved in was in July you launched the Sawab Counterterrorism Center in Abu Dhabi. The focus is on countering, of course, the propaganda from the Islamic State. How is that doing?
It's doing well. It's a big signpost in our counter-ISIL campaign. It's a joint effort between the United Arab Emirates and the U.S., the Sawab Center. Sawab is Arabic for the right path. And this is part of our strategy, which is not to focus on American versus ISIL messaging. That isn't the ballgame. It's the whole rest of the Islamic world versus ISIL. So we want to create a network of networks of different hubs, the first of which is the Sawab Center. So they have about more than 10,000 followers. They're on many tweets and pieces of social media every day, and they're gaining attention and followers even as we speak.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory.